Hey everyone, get ready to be spooked with bedtime scary stories set on rainy nights. The sound of raindrops and thunder will create the perfect, eerie ambiance. So, grab your blanket, get cozy, and close your eyes when you need to. Prepare for a night of goosebumps. I had always felt like an outsider in the bustling city. The endless noise, the constant rush, and the impersonal interactions wore me down. People seemed to be driven by selfish motives, and I craved peace and solitude. That's why I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the woods, far away from the chaos of city life. I'm in my early 30s with an unkempt beard and tired eyes that hint at the struggles I've faced. I packed my essentials, including my tent, sleeping bag, and enough supplies to last a week. I hoped that this retreat into nature would help me find clarity and rejuvenate my weary soul. The first few days in the wilderness were blissful. I enjoyed the serenity of the forest, the chirping of birds, and the rustling of leaves. I spent my days hiking, fishing, and reading by the campfire. The isolation gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. On the fifth night, as I was sitting by the fire, I felt an unusual presence. The air seemed to change, and a strange energy enveloped the clearing. Suddenly, from the shadows, emerged a woman unlike any I had ever seen. She moved with an ethereal grace, her long, dark hair flowing like a river under the moonlight. Her eyes were mesmerizing, and her beauty was otherworldly. "Good evening," she said in a voice as smooth as silk. "My name is Jennifer." I was entranced. I could barely muster a response. Hello," I stammered. "I'm John." Jennifer smiled, a seductive and knowing smile that made my heart race. She sat next to me by the fire, and we talked for hours. She seemed to know everything about me, my dreams, my fears, and my loneliness. Her presence was intoxicating, and I felt a deep connection with her. As the night progressed, Jennifer's allure became irresistible. We moved closer, and under the moonlit sky, we shared a night of passion that felt like a dream. I was lost in the ecstasy of the moment, completely consumed by her. The next morning, I woke up alone. Jennifer was gone, but her scent lingered in the air. I spent the day thinking about her, unable to concentrate on anything else. I felt a strange energy coursing through my veins, a mixture of excitement and unease. That night, Jennifer returned. Once again, we spent the night together, and I felt my energy drain as I succumbed to her charms. This continued for several nights. Each morning, I noticed I was growing weaker. My body was shrinking, and I felt an overwhelming fatigue that seemed to deepen with each encounter. On the sixth night, I noticed something terrifying. My reflection in the river showed a gaunt, almost skeletal figure. My skin was pale, and my eyes were sunken. Panic set in as I realized that Jennifer was not what she seemed. I tried to stay awake, to resist her, but my body betrayed me. That night, as Jennifer approached, she was accompanied by a group of women who looked just as beautiful and enchanting. They surrounded me, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Who are you?" I demanded weakly, my voice trembling. Jennifer's smile was chilling. "We are the Sisters of the Night, John, and you, dear, are our sacrifice." The witches chanted in a language I couldn't understand. Their voices echoed through the forest, creating an eerie symphony that made me shiver. They lifted me and carried me to a stone altar deep in the woods, where a large bonfire blazed. Jennifer stood at the center, her beauty now twisted with malevolence. "You have served your purpose, John," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth it once held. "Your life force will make us young and beautiful forever." I struggled, but I was too weak. The witches began their ritual, drawing strange symbols on my skin and chanting incantations. The flames of the bonfire grew higher, casting grotesque shadows that danced around them. Suddenly, one of the witches revealed her true form, a hideous, gnarled creature with sharp teeth and glowing eyes. The others followed suit, their beautiful facades melting away to reveal monstrous visages. My heart pounded in terror as I realized the true horror of my situation. The ritual reached its climax. The witches surrounded me, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Jennifer stepped forward, holding a dagger made of bone. She chanted an incantation, and as she raised the dagger, I felt a surge of pain and fear. With a swift motion, Jennifer plunged the dagger into my chest. My scream echoed through the forest, but no one was there to hear it. The witches absorbed my life force, their bodies glowing with a dark energy. My vision blurred as my life slipped away, my final thoughts filled with regret and despair. My family never saw me again. Search parties scoured the woods, but there was no trace of me. My disappearance remained a mystery, a ghost story told around campfires. But deep in the forest, the witches thrived. They had their sacrifice, and their beauty and youth were restored. Jennifer and her sisters continued their hunt, luring unsuspecting souls into the woods. And so, the legend of the witches of the forest lived on, a tale of horror and seduction, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of the light. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. I lived in a quiet, uneventful suburb where everyone knew everyone, and nothing exciting ever happened. That changed when the old Thompson house was sold. The new neighbor moved in overnight, and from that moment, everything felt different. His name was Mr. Garrett. Tall, with a gaunt frame and piercing blue eyes, he didn't quite fit into our picture-perfect neighborhood. His presence was unsettling. He rarely came outside during the day, and when he did, he moved with an almost unnatural grace. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the more I observed, the more convinced I became that something was terribly wrong. It started with the animals. Pets that had roamed freely around the neighborhood began to disappear. First, it was Mrs. Henderson's cat, then the Smith's dog. Each time, the owners were heartbroken and put up missing posters, but no one seemed to find it odd except me. One night, I saw Mr. Garrett in his backyard, crouching over something. It was too dark to see clearly, but the way he moved made my skin crawl. The next morning, there were strange marks on the grass, almost like scorch marks, and an odd, lingering smell in the air. I tried to tell my parents, but they just brushed it off, saying I had an overactive imagination. My friends laughed it off as another one of my crazy theories. But I knew what I saw, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Garrett was hiding something sinister. Determined to find out the truth, I started keeping a journal of Mr. Garrett's activities. I noted the times he left the house, the strange noises that came from his basement, and the odd visitors who only came at night. I even managed to snap a few photos, but they were always blurry and inconclusive. One evening, as I was peering through my bedroom window, I saw him carrying a large, wriggling sack into his house. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my camera and hurried outside, keeping to the shadows. I crept around to the side of his house and peeked through a crack in the blinds. What I saw nearly made me scream. Mr. Garrett was standing over a table, and on it lay Mrs. Henderson's missing cat, lifeless and mutilated. He was doing something to it, something that looked like a twisted form of taxidermy. I stumbled back, tripping over a garden hose and making a loud noise. The blinds snapped shut, and I knew I had been seen. I ran back to my house, heart racing, and locked the door behind me. I told my parents again, showed them my journal, but they dismissed it as a prank. "You've been watching too many horror movies," my dad said, ruffling my hair. For days, I lived in fear. Mr. Garrett knew I had seen him, and I was terrified of what he might do. I avoided going outside, but I couldn't stop thinking about the animals and what he might be doing to them. My friends teased me, but I no longer cared. I had to do something. One night, I gathered my courage and decided to confront him. Armed with my camera and a flashlight, I snuck into his backyard and made my way to the basement window. I could hear strange noises coming from inside. Low growls and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. I pressed my face to the glass, and my blood ran cold. The basement was filled with cages, each containing a different animal, all of them looking sick and terrified. In the center of the room, Mr. Garrett was hunched over a large workbench, his back to me. He was working on something, muttering under his breath in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, he turned around and our eyes met. His face twisted into a snarl, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. His teeth were sharp and jagged, like a predator's. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight, and ran for my life. I burst into my house, screaming for my parents. They finally saw the fear in my eyes and decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, I led them to Mr. Garrett's house, my heart pounding in my chest. But when they searched the basement, it was empty. The cages were gone, the workbench was clean, and there was no sign of the horrors I had witnessed. Mr. Garrett stood calmly, watching me with those cold blue eyes. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked the officers, his voice smooth and controlled. "This child has been spying on me and spreading lies." The police took me home, advising my parents to keep a closer watch on me. I felt defeated, but I couldn't let it go. I knew what I had seen, and I knew Mr. Garrett was more than just a strange neighbor. I continued to watch Mr. Garrett, but more cautiously. One night, I saw him leaving the house, carrying another sack. This time, I followed him from a safe distance, my heart pounding with fear and determination. He led me to the edge of the woods, where he disappeared into an old, abandoned cabin. I waited until he was inside, then crept up to the window. Inside, I saw him transforming, his skin rippling and shifting, his teeth growing longer and sharper. He was a monster, and he was preparing for something terrible. I ran back to the neighborhood, my mind racing. I had to stop him, but no one would believe me. In desperation, I broke into the tool shed and grabbed a can of gasoline and a lighter. I knew it was reckless, but I couldn't let him continue his reign of terror. I returned to the cabin and, with shaking hands, poured the gasoline around the perimeter. As I lit the match, I whispered a prayer and threw it onto the soaked wood. Flames erupted, and I ran back, watching as the fire consumed the cabin. The fire department arrived, followed by the police. They found no sign of Mr. Garrett, and the official report stated that the fire was likely caused by vandals. My parents grounded me for my reckless actions, but they couldn't take away the sense of relief I felt. For weeks, I watched the remains of the cabin, expecting the monster to return, but he never did. Life slowly returned to normal, though the memory of Mr. Garrett's monstrous face haunted my dreams. One day, a new family moved into the Thompson house. They were kind and normal, and the neighborhood began to feel safe again. But deep down, I knew the monster was still out there, waiting, and I knew that if he ever returned, I would be ready. Years later, as I moved away for college, I left behind the quiet suburb and the memories of that terrifying summer. But I never forgot. The monster taught me to trust my instincts, to fight for what I believed in, even when no one else would. And I knew that somewhere out there the monster was still lurking, waiting for his next victim, and I would always be watching. It's time for the third story of the night. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, and I've seen some strange things on the road. But nothing could prepare me for what happened that night on the highway. My name is James Carter, and I'm a long-haul trucker. I've always enjoyed the solitude of the open road, the hum of the engine, and the miles stretching out before me. I'm a big guy, 6 feet tall with a rough beard and calloused hands from years of hard work. My rig is my pride and joy, a gleaming Peterbilt 379 that I've spent countless hours maintaining. I was on a routine delivery, transporting a load of electronics from Chicago to Denver. It was late, and I was ahead of schedule, so I decided to take a detour through a scenic route that wound through dense woods. I had driven this route before, but never this late at night. The sun had long set, and the highway was eerily quiet. The forest loomed on either side, tall trees casting long shadows that seemed to reach out towards the road. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead. Everything was normal. Just another night on the road, until it wasn't. As I drove, I noticed something strange. The same landmarks kept appearing. An old, dilapidated gas station, a rusted-out car by the side of the road, a peculiar tree with twisted branches. At first, I thought I was just tired, but after passing the same gas station for the third time, I knew something was wrong. Damn it, must have missed a turn, I muttered to myself, pulling over to check my GPS. But my GPS showed me driving in a straight line. Frustrated, I turned the truck around and headed back the way I came, hoping to find a familiar sign or exit. Minutes turned into hours, and no matter how many times I turned around or took different roads, I kept ending up at the same spots. The gas station, the rusted car, the twisted tree, they were always there, mocking me. As the clock struck midnight, my radio started to crackle with static, and an icy chill filled the cab. Suddenly, the engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the dark highway. I tried the ignition, but the truck wouldn't start. Panic set in as I realized I was completely alone. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab, the cool night air biting at my skin. I checked the engine, but everything seemed fine. That's when I heard it. A soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. "James!" I whipped around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing at the edge of the forest was a figure, cloaked in shadows. My heart pounded as I approached cautiously, the light revealing a woman. She was beautiful, with long, flowing hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled, a haunting smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "I'm Lilith. You seem lost." There was something mesmerizing about her, something that made it hard to look away. She beckoned me to follow her, and against my better judgment, I did. She led me deeper into the woods, the path winding like a serpent through the trees. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To a place where you can rest," she replied cryptically. We arrived at a small clearing where an old, abandoned cabin stood. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. Lilith led me inside, the door creaking ominously as it swung open. The cabin was dimly lit, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. A fireplace crackled with a warm, inviting fire. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I felt strangely at ease. "Sit," Lilith said, motioning to a worn armchair. "You must be tired." I sat down, feeling the weariness of the night wash over me. Lilith moved gracefully around the room, her movements almost hypnotic. She handed me a cup of tea, and I took it, grateful for the warmth. As I sipped the tea, my eyelids grew heavy. Lilith's voice seemed to lull me into a trance. "Rest now, James. Everything will be clear in the morning." I woke with a start, the fire now just embers in the hearth. The cabin was silent, and Lilith was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as I realized I was still in the woods, still lost. I rushed outside, but the clearing was empty. The truck was gone, and the path we had taken was overgrown, as if it had never been there. Desperation clawed at me as I wandered aimlessly through the forest. The whispers started again, growing louder and more insistent. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, and I felt an unseen presence watching me. Suddenly, Lilith appeared before me, her eyes now dark and menacing. "You can't leave, James. You belong to us now." A cold hand gripped my heart as the forest came alive with nightmarish figures. They surrounded me, their faces twisted with malice. Lilith's voice echoed in my mind, drowning out my thoughts. "Join us, James. Forever." I bolted, running blindly through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I didn't stop until I burst out onto the highway, my truck miraculously parked on the shoulder. The engine roared to life as I jumped in and sped away, not daring to look back. As I drove, the landmarks began to blur and fade. The gas station, the rusted car, the twisted tree, they vanished into the darkness. My heart pounded as I finally saw a familiar exit sign and turned onto a populated road. I didn't stop until I reached a truck stop, the lights a welcome beacon in the night. I parked and stumbled out of the cab, my legs trembling. The other drivers looked at me with concern, but I couldn't bring myself to speak of what had happened. Months have passed, but the memory of that night haunts me. I can still hear Lilith's voice in my dreams, calling me back to the forest. The whispers follow me, no matter how far I drive. I've tried to move on, but a part of me is still lost in those woods, trapped in a ghost's loop. I've shared my story with a few trusted friends, but no one believes me. They say it was just a hallucination, a trick of the mind. But I know the truth. The witch is real, and she's out there, waiting for the next lost soul to wander into her trap. And every time I see a stretch of dark highway, I wonder if I'll find myself back in that forest, caught in an endless loop, forever haunted by the witch's seductive smile. And as I write this, I can hear her whispering my name, beckoning me to return. The thought sends a chill down my spine, but I know one thing for sure. I will never take that detour again.